So today's session is going to be going over the admin setup in Midnight. This is where you'll go in to handle the setup or modification of any of your company info, add or change any of your tax rates, make any adjustments to user and employee login credentials and security permissions, and control pretty much the majority of any of the drop-down lists that you see across the general areas of Midnight. I'm not going to cover all of the lists today, as some of the items in here pertain to other modules that I'll bring up in other training sessions. For instance, print estimating or some data regarding order-related information with terms and conditions and such. But we'll be covering most of them today. As we cover the areas here in Midnight, menu is just something that only properly assigned security-driven users will be able to do. So this isn't something that everyone's going to be able to adjust data in all the time, and this also won't be something that all users may have permission to off the get-go. So if someone does have something that needs to be adjusted in one of these menus, just make sure that you or your team know who to contact internally to make sure that your information can properly be updated. So to get into the admin menu, I of course click our small gear icon. This jumps us into admin settings, where our account GLID list is the first thing that we're given to look at. In here, you have the controller for all of your accounting information, and any of the GLIDs that you have created in this particular zone will be available to be selected on any of your tax, postage, or service-related GLID information for sync into accounting softwares such as QuickBooks, Peachtree, or any other accounting software that you or your organization may use. Working down the list, we're going to jump into a couple of other accounting areas. Very briefly, look at our accounting item code handler. And this is pretty similar. Various other accounting packages do utilize different terms or different required fields to make sure that data can get plugged in properly into the system. In here, this is kind of like a different category. Some software may or may not use this, and it's not necessarily required that you know this. By default, we do have a few simple fields populated in this area, and this actually goes for pretty much all of our admin-related fields. To go a little bit further, if you ever do need to adjust something, you can either do a quick filter to pull up the instances of whatever it is that meets the criteria. You can see our filters are by beginning text rather than containing text. You can also clear your filters by using this clear filter button, which only appears after you have something selected. You can adjust what's active or not in pretty much all areas by adjusting this visible active equals checked or unchecked to determine what you can actually see as you enter the various locations of Midnight. And if you ever need to add something new, and this goes for not only this particular screen, but for almost any other, you can add a new item down below. And by clicking save, the little save disk here, you do commit those instances to the data record. I'm going to jump ahead and carry into this accounting part bits to go over some of the postage handling information. And by postage account, this refers to your instances like stamps, meters, and other methods of billing for shipping and delivery. Alternatively, postage can also relate to internal expenses and escrow expenses. This postage account list, for instance, determines what accounts you can have money deposited for a particular customer record. And you can assign each individual postage payment account to a customer record within their customer account. Postage inventory is a little bit more driven towards the actual stamps itself, where you can decide and assign expenses related to actual instances of postage and postage types, just allow you to control the different methods of being able to mark funds as either received, applied, or placed against particular instances of cash transaction. The contact type and the CRM handlers here are actually something I'll be going over in our CRM handling session, but do be aware that these 5 areas control what you see in the CRM for the customer instances, such as what kind of customer they are, their source of acquisition, their preferred industry, or whatever it is that they do, just in general, and the activity type and summary type defining activities for things like doing operations to make a phone call or placing emails, and the contact type referring to whether or not the particular contact at an organization is perhaps an executive or sales rep or CSR, internal technologies representative, or otherwise. Skipping on a bit further, we have the delivery methods, which handles on jobs what you would necessarily want to do with your general shipping commands. In any of your orders shipping tab, you'll have the ability to select any of these. And when preparing work orders, perhaps a postage prepay invoice or packing slip, this information will be made available. Continuing down, our departments are handled for your scheduling purposes and also for determining just which locations your employees have residence in or particular responsibilities with. This isn't a list that's responsible for any particular logic in the system, such as scheduling shop floor or payment handles. However, this is important so that way you can make sure that your team is properly organized when doing any type of audit reports, keeping up with HIPAA regulations or otherwise. Which brings me into our employees menu. Under an employee account, you can either add a new employee by clicking the new employee button at the top, or you can go in and adjust one that already exists. If I were to just jump into a record for myself, I could see my front list, which is my core administrative information, my home address here, and my business address here are actually fields that are referenced in 2 different areas. We have some reports that look at home address, and we have common things like invoices, estimate reports, and otherwise that look towards our business address for general info. The business phone number will be what's referenced on any instances in which a report looks towards your internal phone number, for instance, an invoice for a callback number. And your work email is what's utilized in Midnight's email distribution system. So you'll want to make sure that the work email and business phone number are both as up to date as possible. If you ever wish to get rid of an employee or adjust a file for a record on an employee that's no longer necessary, you can just uncheck this active checkbox. This keeps the record in the system, but makes it so it's hidden, effectively unavailable from any location or drop-down menu across Midnight. The big convenience here is that when you delete an employee record, it does remove any of their associated costs. So expense reports like job costing reports and such may show information slightly inaccurately. By deactivating the employee, you maintain that data integrity and you don't risk any sort of data being lost. The other key information in here is under the roles. This is where you determine whether or not one of your employees is, say, a sales rep or a CSR. Any drop downs that commonly refer to these particular areas will be controlled by whatever's checked in here. So for instance, if I decide that I'm not a CSR, I work as a sales rep or in our accounting department or handling purchase orders only, I can uncheck the departments in which I don't want to appear under, leaving my name as being one that would only appear under these particular drop downs. The dashboard allows you to control your main screen's primary view. The convenience of the dashboard gives you the flexibility to view widgets. And if you're not too familiar with widgets, they are these 4 containers that you see here on the main screen. The open estimates, open orders, estimates by rep, and employees active jobs are the stock widgets that we have for the system. And you can feel free to adjust them by adding or removing any amount up to what you have over here. If you'd like to add a new one, it's as simple as just clicking the checkbox and clicking add, and then selecting it to move it up and down to determine where it occurs and can be displayed on the homepage itself. To remove, it's the same thing. Just click and remove to pull it out of the list, so that way you'll only have whatever it is that you need. And in order to update this list, you do need to log out and log back in to make sure that the record does get updated. Now, if you're a user of our system for a long time or had used the system at least before September of 2017, you may be used to our home screen having only 4 widgets available. Our new interface allows all of our widgets to be utilized, so you don't need to worry about placing too many in here now. The Quick Links report dropdown allows you to control which report is available on the home screen's reports dropdown button for the production report. The job tracking info is where you allow your user to have a defined wage rate, and also if you have our shop floor system, the code that they would use to log into that and the amount of jobs that they could be clocked into or jobbed into at any point in time. And last, the full system user login. This is where you determine the security permissions of your particular account. Additionally, you can reset a password for an employee by typing in a new password that meets the criteria provided, 6 characters or 8 characters, and always at least one non-alphanumeric character. After typing in your password, click Reset Password and Save to commit it. And in here is also where you can fix an employee record if it has become locked out. After a user has potentially failed to log in up to 5 times or more, their account will become locked out. If an administrator jumps in here, they'll find that this locked out box is checked. All they need to do is uncheck it, hit save and close, and the record for this employee is now able to be logged back in. Now I'll bypass our estimates and orders list, as I'll be going over these various handlers in a short time after our next session. But I'll jump into our global settings, where the other primary functionality of the admin menu is handled. In here are your general company settings. This is all referred to as your licensee information. The info here is where a lot of your defaults are controlled, such as your default tax jurisdiction, your default company logo, your default your default company email account. And any of your invoice reports or estimate reports that refer to licensee data are referring to the information driven from here. You can have multiple companies assigned to your organization. For instance, if you are just one part of a larger organization, or you're a large organization that has bought and runs several smaller ones, you can have several within yourself. By having a default, this allows you to have a parent for which all the children can be associated with, and this default company allows you to also determine a primary accounting package. If your organization uses QuickBooks or Peachtree or any other accounting software, you can define that in here by clicking the accounting integration button, selecting your method of accounting software, and plugging in any related information such as your accounts receivable account name, if there's any special rulings that need to be made, for instance, on order taxation, etc., you can define all those features in here. Additionally, on the right side, you have the ability as a global adjustment to define whether or not orders can have their number adjusted, whether or not our system's automation for inventory deduction can be enabled for jobs that have a ship date applied, a close date applied, or could be done automatically on the version level after a version is marked as complete for multi-version jobs. If you don't have any of these boxes checked, then our automation system for inventory deduction does not apply itself. And the only way you can deduct items then is by either using the inventory app or by going into the individual item records and deducting them within each one. You can also define your lot tracking methods, such as first in, first out, or last in, first out. In here, multiple can be tracked. I would only ever suggest keeping one, but there are rare instances when you may need to track both. You can have your estimates and orders screen modified in such a way so that way your total services and tax are displayed as well as your cost per thousand or your CPM. This does not have any effect on which bearing of your estimates and orders reports will follow. This only looks towards the main screen itself. You can define your default warehouse, which is where inventory is received by default if you're taking advantage of our inventory scanning system. And there's two different logos which our system relies on. A reports logo, which is generally a slightly smaller version of your company logo, and the full-size system logo, which is what you'll see on your ads in the upper corner of any window that you jump around to Midnight in. Moving over to our various other fields, we have estimates and orders, which allows you to fill in default information like whether or not your CRM data updates when copied, print estimation and calculation defaults, and accounting software limitations. Additionally, in the purchase orders, you can define any of your PO rules, and you get the same thing with inventory handling, dynamic job board, uh, classification of priorities and task statuses, and CRM handling with new customers to be added to the system. Some areas that won't be covered in other sessions, though, are the system handler, which allows you to define whether or not Midnight itself will allow you to save when trying to jump off of a page after making changes. The custom links, which allow you to adjust what you see in the drop-down for the quick links menu on any particular page across Midnight. The password rule, which is something that, while adjustable, is something that only virtual system staff can modify. This is something that may need to be adjusted, for instance, 90-day password renewals, password length of 8 characters or more or less if you have a different requirement there, and notifications for when the password expiration date does appear. And lastly, there's the reports handler. This is where you plug in your default email signature for reports that you're emailing out of the system. You can also plug in your default BCC, which would be an internal email account that's used to track outgoing messages from Midnight by doubling as an alternative to how Midnight stores data. Midnight doesn't necessarily track outgoing emails, but by having a BCC set up to one of your company's internal email accounts, this is how you can track what goes out to just about anybody. Lastly, you can also have security-based role applications for what reports are available. For instance, sales reps can access invoices, inventory and warehouse team can only access inventory reports, etc. And finally, a new field that we have here, our page DNA integration. We do have a couple of other features in Midnight, and this is one of which it ties to the API or external data application. Largely, this is an unused field, but if you do have an access or demand to connect to page DNA, or as we continue to expand this, other methods of data transfer, those fields will be in here. So as we continue to go down a little bit further in the administration list, we'll see that there's other key areas like holidays, international format, and pretty much anything that you would assign for as a general or non-applicable to a primary module feature. In holidays, this is where you can determine rate modifiers for payment adjustments. International format is where you determine whether or not your organization is located internationally and how you want your dates, phone numbers, and method of currency modified. This can be useful for domestic clients as well as those with international clients. If you have a customer perhaps in Japan or in Europe that you normally do business with as just a rare one-off instance, you can jump into, say, your currency modifier and adjust it so that way it shows the euro or pound symbol instead of the dollar symbol on the reports. This makes invoices a little bit easier to handle when dealing with clients that are internationally located. because otherwise our method of currency tracking wouldn't automatically update itself. Issue tracking, job types, and machine departments and machines are tied towards the setup handler for our order system. So I'll be going over those at a later time, but to just be briefly aware, issues are where you would identify expenses related to problems that go along with the job, such as having to rework or having to recreate, reship goods that have been lost, damaged, stolen, otherwise modified in a way that can't be given to a customer. Job type simply determines what kind of jobs you're running, if it's a frequent one, if it's something that's run biannually, maybe monthly or weekly. You can define those features here. And machines and machine departments more related to scheduling and job costing related track data. You can have your machines list and your machines department tie themselves to each other, which allow you to figure out and consolidate which machines are able to be worked on for a particular task or a particular job's group of tasks. Going down a little bit further, you have our postage handler, which allows you to determine all of the different methods of postage that you have in your system and the different methods of either distribution of goods or just distribution of postage themselves, and the post offices in which you do all of your work at. The print admin menu controller allows you to define your presses that are utilized for print expenses and time calculations, such as your Konica Minoltas or your Heidelbergs. You can define any inks that are going to be utilized and consumed. You can define any cutters that are built in for tied-in operations, and you can define your templates, which can be used to pretty much build an entire job out of. Project type, reason code, and reason objects, report objects and report types are mostly hidden scenes. Um, I'll be going over the report objects very briefly. In any area in which you see reports scattered across Midnight, whether it be in a particular module or if it exists within the primary reports menu, you can control the names of those reports. You can modify the location of those reports, or you can adjust whether or not they're even active by taking a look and adjusting anything that you see in this list. Making edit to a row, you can change the name of a report, you can change where it exists at, you can hide it, and you can even modify it in such a way so that way when opened, it displays all pages. Lastly, you can have a filter by user option enabled for the report, so that way you can control who gets to see this on a security level. By default, these are all set as no, and you can pick them as you feel as though they need to be applied. The report type objects list is just the different departments or locations or modules in which you can place your reports into. You'll see there's instances like estimate reports, order reports. Those just define whether or not you have it visible within a particular module. Anything you don't see that stands out, such as sales report, production report, job costing report, those will all be visible within the reports module. Going a bit further, we have our security handler. In here, this is where you can modify the roles that exist or create new ones. By default, for instance, we don't have a sales manager security role. If you need to create a new one, you could simply type an instance of that user active and save it. And then to adjust the permissions that that particular account has, you can enter the create role right, select that particular security role, and pick and choose down to a pretty specific level exactly what it is that particular account is capable of interacting with. You have your full module control, you have your element of each page within a module. And depending on the screen, you also have the ability to modify different elements within that particular page. Bear in mind, anything left open will effectively be considered no. So when you're that has a new field added to it, just be wary that you're not leaving any of these values blank as you continue. The service types that you see here are defined as what you would classify as your departments. On your order screen or do any of your work in and tie any of your services to. So as you modify or adjust these, this is where you control both the sort order, the names, their codes, and also any icons or colors that are associated with them on our production boards and dynamic job board. I'll be going over the functionality of the dynamic job board connection here a little bit more as we touch in the dynamic job board and job costing session, but just be aware that all the controls in here are very simple to adjust, but important to keep track of that they're not free to adjust entirely, primarily because the sort numbers that you have in here affect a lot of different areas, not just the estimate screen or the job board. Services and service wizards are a little bit more complex in how these are structured. The service wizards can be tied to the services, and any available in here can have that wizard applied right here after giving it a wizard action. I'll be going over this more in our billing and orders-based class as well. But the most important thing to bear in mind is that the services that you see in here are tied virtually everywhere across Midnight for expense tracking, revenue tracking, and whatnot. So just be careful when making any modifications in here. If you need to add a new one, you can simply go into your quick links and click Add New Service. And if you need to get rid of one that you no longer see as valuable to your organization, all you need to do is jump in and uncheck the active checkbox. Lastly, of the key areas that I want to go over are the user-defined fields. In here, under your primary modules like your CRM, estimates, inventory, or purchase orders module, you can assign UDFs, which are valued fields that you give to your own screen that other users may not have. In here, you can define the name of a particular value. You can define what kind of a field it is. For instance, if it's a text, date, currency field, perhaps a time or just a number for an integer or a decimal value. You can apply what we would call an input mask, which is text that appears there before somebody types something in, such as select or please enter. Or you can also apply a limited amount of choices by taking advantage of utilizing the method that you'll see here with open carets to indicate a group of selections and a pipe separator to separate each of the allowable selections. This sort of simulates a drop-down menu, but the only difference here is that there is no way to fully control what exists there. You can delete and modify these as you need though, so don't be afraid to explore and see what you can create. Lastly, for certain UDFs such as order version, and estimate, which do to an extent interact with each other, you can have the export function set to yes or no to determine whether or not a job can continuously copy forward and export data into alternative versions of itself. For instance, you may have a invoice date field that you wouldn't want to copy from job to job, as you would never be copying an invoice date. But you may also have a loyalty discount field to mark as whether or not a particular job or customer is marked as something that you want to apply a loyalty discount to. In this case, you can define what's important to copy or export forward or not. Additionally, all of these user-defined fields can be placed on different reports depending on which ones you're looking at. In particular, the order and order version user-defined fields can be placed on, say, invoices, work orders, or production reports. Additionally, order and order version user-defined fields can be seen on the dynamic job board, which isn't necessarily a report, but a collection of data. Others, like a vendor user-defined field or item user-defined field, can exist on certain reports within their respective modules. So if you do add one of these fields and determine that it's an important field for you to track or be able to access on any sort of printed documentation, be aware that especially if it's below the 10th value, that you can get these added in pretty much anywhere. The amount up to 30 that you see in all of these fields was just a recently added feature, so our reports have not all been adjusted to accommodate for this many UDFs yet. But in all cases, you should at least be able to get 1 through 10 on reports such as your production reports. That's pretty much everything for our admin menu. I'll return back to our home page, and I'll open up the session to complete it. So give me just a moment here, and I'll wrap up the main session.